German Expressionism officially started in 1914, and it was said to have started the German Revolution because of the art's rejection by the state and the upper class. So, Expressionism was a mixture of style that consisted of Cubism, Futurism, and Extractionism. Blah. So, its defining purpose as an art form was to state the feelings and expression of your inner self. And so that being said, you could probably guess that Expressionism's emotion came from the world around them. So its society and politics were pretty much what these artists painted about. So Expressionism flourished in visual arts, like painting or drawing, but mostly it consisted of lyrical poetry, prose, and drama. But painting is pretty much what Expressionism was known for. So, Expressionism wanted to make art and, obviously it wanted to make art, but it wanted to, bring a new element to art. It wanted art and people to form unity, and so it pretty much meant that they wanted to break the modern art form. They wanted to reveal the art universal character of, the world. So they just wanted to, like I said, break the art form. They wanted to abandon all other theories that imply a narrow, exclusive, nationalistic attitude and just bring something totally new to the table. And I believe they achieved that because they got a lot of people talking about it, and lots of critics didn't understand Expressionism and where they were coming from. And since there were so many different artists and feelings and different emotions that these artists were having, critics didn't understand it and said it was inconsistent, which I didn't really understand. If I was a critic in the 1900s, I'd probably, back then, you had narrow minds, but, if they were talking about it now, I'd probably say that was wrong because, if you're an artist and you have different emotions, you can't really have a theme. If you're a generally sad artist, then you don't really paint happy things. And if you're a generally happy painter, you don't really paint, sad things. So for them to say it was inconsistent, I don't see really why, because it was really your expression, your take on what the world was and how you were feeling at the time. So, that's just my little input on it. But actually, some people did think that it was brilliant. A guy named Paul Fletcher, who was an art critic, called Expressionism anti-intellectual, emotional, and spiritual, and he said that it was a metaphysical necessity of the German people. And at first I was like, whoa, this dude is totally dissing Expressionism, but he's not. The anti-intellectual part, I think, is actually kind of a compliment in a way because, you're not really thinking much about the art. You're like, oh, well, this person's sad. You can see that I like art like that because sometimes, I don't want to have to dig well, this blue here, shows that he's sad. I want to be able to pick it up. And I guess that's what Expressionism did. And that's what Paul Fletcher was trying to say. So we're going to focus on 3 artists during this presentation. We're going to focus on Emil Nolde, Franz Marc, and Edvard Munch. And we believed that these artists were people that, really changed how Expressionism looked, and they made, big changes in Expressionism. So I hope by the end of this you see why they were a big deal.
Emil Nolde added a special dimension to German Expressionism, and his career illustrates a number of the moral dilemmas which faced German modernists of the first generation. He was born in 1867 and grew up on the farm which had belonged to his mother's family for 9 generations. Even as a boy, Nolde was different from his 3 brothers. He drew, modeled, and painted covered boards and barn doors with drawings in chalk. Some aspects of the family background, however, affected him deeply. In his youth, Nolde read the Bible a great deal, which is what many of his paintings were based off later in life. It was clear that Nolde was unsuited for farm work, and in 1884 he took a job as an apprentice carver in a furniture factory. Here he stayed for 4 years, drawing and painting in his spare time. In 1888, He went to Munich to see an exhibition of industrial arts and managed to stay on by finding a job in the furniture factory. After only a few weeks he moved, he found a similar job and attended classes in a school of industrial arts in the evenings. Eventually he gave up his job and enrolled in daily classes at the same school, drawing from plaster casts and studying perspective and anatomy. He was unable to stay more than 2 semesters, and his savings ran out. In the fall of 1889, he moved to Berlin, Germany, where he took a job as a furniture designer and spent his leisure time studying old master paintings in the magnificent Berlin museums. He also had his first encounters with ancient Egyptian art, which he was very inspired by. In 1890, he fell ill and spent the summer on his parents' farm. The fall of 1891 marked a change of direction when Nold saw an advertisement for a teaching post at the Museum of Industrial Arts at St. Gallen in Switzerland. He applied for the job and was accepted, moving to St. Gallen in January 1892. His duties were to teach industrial and oriental drawing. The job was demanding and he could paint only in the vacations. Nevertheless, the fact that Switzerland was at the crossroads of Europe enabled him to travel. He went to Milan and saw Leonardo's Last Supper, some aspects of which were to haunt him long afterwards. He discovered the symbolists and was deeply impressed by a performance called The Wild Duck. Like many men, he started to feel that he was alone, misunderstood. He was to suffer from these feelings for the rest of his life, latterly with some reason. In 1893, Nold embarked on an artistic enterprise which he at first treated only half seriously. He made a series of humorous postcards in which he represented the most famous of the Swiss mountains in semi-human form as a race of giants. 2 of these were reproduced in 1896. Nold borrowed enough money to issue a large edition of the postcards. They appealed to popular taste, and 100,000 copies were sold within 10 days. Nold made 25,000 gold francs and, freed from financial worries for his time being, gave up his job and went to live in Munich. He wanted to study at the Munich Academy under the most celebrated painter in the city, Franz von Stuck, but was not accepted and instead attended 2 private academies. In the autumn of 1899, he moved to Paris for 9 months, where he worked on and off at the Académie Julian, but spent most of the time in the museums and studying the special exhibits put on for the Paris World's Fair of 1900. He was already an admirer of Damiers and was now impressed by Manet, but not only by the other younger Impressionists. Nold returned to Germany in 1900 and embarked on a tormented search to discover his own artistic personality. I had an infinite number of visions at this time, for wherever I turned, my eyes, nature, the sky, and clouds were alive in each stone and in the branches of each tree. Everywhere my fingers strived and lived their still or wildly animated life, and they aroused my enthusiasm as well as tormented me with demands that I paint them. Despite these feelings, as Nold explained, he painted very few visionary pictures during this time. They were to come later, but instead painted many landscapes and portraits. In 1900, he moved to Copenhagen, where he met and married his wife Ada. They soon began to be dogged by financial problems, and in addition, Ada was repeatedly ill. In the spring of 1903, the couple moved to the remote island of Alsen. In 1904, they went to Berlin, where Ada made an ill-fated attempt to make some money by singing in nightclubs. This led to a serious breakdown, so Nold took her to Italy to move forward. The Italian scene, for all its beauty, did not move him as his native Germany did, but in 1905 they returned. Ada was in and out of one sanatorium after another. Nold based himself in his lonely fisherman's cottage in Alston. His visionary feelings were stronger than ever. The calls of animals at night had the power of suggesting colors. The cries appeared as shrill yellows, the hooting of owls in deep violet tones. He was rescued from his isolation by the younger artist of Die Brooke, who recognized in him as a kindred spirit. Eventually, Nold's art became much freer. The paintings took shape as I worked. The fantasies and the biblical paintings he created at this time are generally considered his greatest works. He was becoming a well-known and controversial figure in the German art world of the time. In December 1910, he wrote a violently critical letter with nationalist and racist overtones to Max Liebermann, the greatly respected president of the Berlin so-called group, who happened to be Jewish. As a result, he was expelled from the group. Then Max and other expressionists formed the new group in the following year. Nold duly joined and helped to give the new organization much of its aggressive character. The museum in Halle acquired his painting of the Last Supper despite the violent opposition of Dr. von Bode, the great savant who had been largely responsible for building up the magnificent collection of old masters in Berlin. In 1913, for reasons which remain somewhat mysterious, Nold was offered a unique opportunity to expand his horizons. The German Colonial Office invited him to take part in an expedition to the German territories in the South Pacific. His main purpose was medical, to study health conditions among the natives, but Nold, who had no professional qualities for the task, was asked to research the racial characteristics of the populations. He and Ada traveled to Moscow, Tokyo, Hong Kong, and many other places. In 1914, he made trips to Ireland, which is now Ireland, and the Admiralty Islands, before setting off again for home, traveling to Aden. When Nold and his wife arrived at Port Said, they found that the First World War had broken out and were only able to make their way home by obtaining Danish passports. On this journey, Nold noted the damage done by the Europeans, even in China, which possessed such an ancient civilization of its own. "We live in the era evil," he said, "in which the white man brings the whole earth in servitude." On his return, he resumed what had now become a customary pattern, which was to spend the spring, summer, and autumn in the countryside, and the winter in Berlin, where he drew rather than painted. He survived the war, as did his wife, who died in November 1946. As the old grand man of German art, Nold now enjoyed a new lease of life. In 1947, there were exhibitions in Kiel and Lübeck to celebrate his 80th birthday. In 1948, he married a 28-year-old woman, the daughter of a friend. In 1952, he was awarded the German Order of Merit, his country's highest civilian decoration. He continued to work with tremendous energy, producing oils based on the watercolors he had created during the years of persecution. His last oil painting was done in 1951, and he was able to make watercolors late into 1955. He died in April of 1956 at age of 88 years old. The artist's work has been exhibited in many art galleries and museums, including in St. Petersburg, Russia, and the Modern Art Museum in New York. Nold will always be remembered and honored as one of the greatest art expressionists that have ever lived.
Edvard Munch played a great role in German Expressionism. He was born in Norway in 1863 and was the second of 5 children. Unfortunately, he had a depressing childhood with one tragedy happening after another. His mother died of tuberculosis, and later his favorite sister Sophie also died of tuberculosis. His other sister was institutionalized for a mental illness for most of her life. So he was raised by his father and Aunt Karen, but they lived in poverty and they moved frequently from one apartment to another. A lot of Munch's early drawings and watercolors depicted the interiors of all the places he lived, in addition to some landscapes. When he was a teen, he really started to have an interest in art. His father was a military doctor, so he would sometimes go to the hospital with him and draw the patients there. Luckily, his aunt, who also looked over him, was really encouraging of his artistic abilities. His father, however, changed a lot after the death of Munch's mother. As Edvard Munch wrote, "My father was temperamentally nervous and obsessively religious to the point of psychoneurosis. From him I inherited the seeds of madness." So his father caused him a lot of anxiety growing up, and Munch dealt with a lot of sickness himself during his childhood and early adult years. He ended up going to a college of art, but his sickness disrupted his schooling a lot. He often ended up drawing in his free time, and he spent most of his time alone. So sickness was obviously a big part of Munch's life, so it in turn became a major theme in his artwork. He painted the sick child, which is said to be influenced by his sister's death, and it's a very sad painting, and you can tell that Munch poured a lot of emotion into this. The tone of it is very somber, with his use of darker colors and shadows, which he also uses in a lot of his other paintings. Now, if you've only seen one other painting by Edvard Munch before now, it would probably be The Scream. Not only is it an important precursor of German Expressionism, but it has been parodied many times since Munch painted it in 1893. It was originally titled The Scream of Nature. The meaning behind it is open to interpretation, but as Munch quoted, "I was walking along the road with some friends one day. The sun set, the sky became a bloody red, and I stood still, dead tired as my friends walked on. I stayed behind, trembling with fright. I felt the great scream in nature." Now, whatever he meant by that, there is obviously a lot of his inner emotions and anxieties displayed in the scream. His unique style is shown in this one too, with the contrasting colors and the weavy lines that he used. And the painting just has a dark, lonely feeling to it, and it gives you a glimpse of Edvard Munch's mental state at the time when he was like really anxious and lonely. The second painting in the series is called Despair, which really sums up what the painting is about. The background with the bridge and the red sky is exactly the same as in The Scream, but there's a whole new feel to this painting. It is said that Munch lived near this bridge, and he did a lot of walking and wandering around here. There are feelings of loneliness and hopelessness in this, which must be what Munch is feeling as he walks alone on this bridge. And then there's also this painting called Anxiety, which again is set over the same bridge as the one in The Scream and Despair. And when I see this painting with all those people looking on with blank expressions, I feel like they're the ones who are watching the scene taking place in The Scream. They are just watching the guy stand on the bridge screaming, and that might not have been Edvard Munch's intentions, but that is what I get out of it. And although anxiety, sickness, and death were common themes in most of his paintings, he had some beautiful landscapes as well, such as this one titled The Mystery of a Summer Night. This painting still has his signature style in it with the long wavy lines and it kind of looks messy, but like draws your eye in, and it has contrasting colors. And if you'll notice, the colors in this one are brighter, and it doesn't look as sad as his other paintings. And what I noticed is if you look closely in the rock in the lower right corner, you can kind of see a smiling face in the rock there. So it's definitely one of his more happy paintings. And the next painting is called Summer Night, Anger on the Shore. This one is another one of his happier paintings. It just gives off a really calm vibe with the neutral colors and smooth lines used. And the woman named Inger looks very relaxed and confident. And most of his portraits include people looking really sad, so this is a lot different. Munch did several self-portraits, including this one called Self-Portrait with Wine Bottle. Notice this one is very grim. He used dark colors, and the expression on his face is very distressed. He was a heavy drinker as an adult, which is why he might have had a wine bottle next to him. This was painted in 1906, which was a very hard time in his life. He had some mental illness, and he was alcoholic. So in 1908, he suffered a breakdown, but he got treatment for it, and he got better, but he was never fully better, and he just lived a solitary life from then on. So there's a lot of loneliness and anguish and pain expressed in this painting. The painting called Red and White is one of the many paintings of woman by him. Edvard Munch never married. I guess he was just too focused on his artwork. When he was living in solitude for the later years of his life, he hired a lot of female models to pose for him though. And so a lot of his paintings from that time were portraits, and most of them were nude paintings. Munch occasionally left his home to paint murals, and he also continued to paint more self-portraits. He was not strictly a painter though. Besides painting, he was a printmaker, working in etching, lithography, and wood engraving too. So he had a lot of different things he worked on besides just his paintings. His painting called The Kiss is one of his more famous paintings now, but critics at the time said his art was sloppy and hard to identify the portraits as human figures. They also called his style an insult to art, so that's really harsh. In the 1930s and 1940s, the Nazis labeled Munch's work as degenerate art, which was happening to a lot of other artists at the time in Germany. But 82 works by Munch were removed from German museums because they were degenerate art, and so they were sold by the Nazis, which is really sad. And as you can imagine, Munch did not like this very much, and he lived in fear of the Nazis. He didn't like them taking away his art, because art was the only enjoyable part of his life. In 1937, Adolf Hitler announced, "For all we care, those prehistoric Stone Age culture barbarians and art stutterers can return to the caves of their ancestors and there can apply their primitive international scratching." So Munch passed away in 1944 of pneumonia, and his remaining artworks were donated to museums and galleries. He leaves behind a legacy, though. The country of Norway decided to build the Munch Museum of Art, which is pretty cool. It was put up to commemorate his work and his life, and so that his art could be enjoyed by the general public, and so it wasn't just stashed away somewhere. The museum observed his unique style and the distinct movements which he introduced to the world through his art. The style in which Edvard Munch painted in was just really unique, and it was a prelude to the whole German Expressionism movement and all the dark pieces that would come out of this period as well.
Franz Marc was born on February 8th in Munich in 1880. He was a very intelligent kid who went to school to be a physics major, but then decided that it would be better to follow in his father's footsteps as a landscape painter. Franz Marc was pretty, well off. His parents were kind of rich in a way. That's why it was pretty easy for him to, switch kind of whatever career he wanted to do. Instead of being a physics major, like I said, he followed in his father's footsteps to be a landscape painter. So, instead of going to a regular school, he went to an art academy in Munich in 1900, where he became influenced with different types of art movements. So, in 1902, he went to Bavaria and then got inspired to paint plein air paintings, which is pretty much you use the elements that surround you. So if the sky is blue, then you paint it blue. If a tree is green, then you make it green, instead of making it unrealistic colors, like yellow trees and whatnot and things like that. So when he was in Bavaria, this also carried over to Greece, and he painted two women on a hillside where you can really see the plein air aspect, because the sky is blue, and the sky is blue, so you painted it blue, and then you have the women who just look natural because they're just sitting on the hillside and there's nothing really abstract or abnormal about it. They're just sitting on the hillside. So a few years later, he went to Paris and he met lots of great artists such as Manet, Monet, Renoir, if that's how you say it, and Van Gogh. So Marc really liked Van Gogh's art style, and so he started to paint some pictures of what Van Gogh was doing. So he made a painting called Maple Tree or Larch Tree. There was different names for it, and so you can really see the same type of style that Van Gogh has. And so if you look at Van Gogh's Starry Night, you see the smooth brush strokes, and the colors are very realistic. And then you look at Marc's tree picture, the maple tree, and then you see the exact same thing, except it's a different picture, obviously, but you see the brush strokes are the same, and certain things like that. And so yeah, you can really see that he started to really pick up on that. And you can also see in this picture that he had elements of plein air still, so he really felt that plein air was a really important part about what he should be doing for his paintings. And so then he made another one in Van Gogh style too, called A Deer at Dusk. And so Franz Marc kind of took Van Gogh's style and added his own type of style to this painting too. So as you can see here, there's a bunch of bright colors, and there's wild brush, wild strokes in the method that you see, and then it shows lots of aspects of expressionism. And so you can also see the emotion in this painting, because expressionism is all about how you're feeling, and you kind of paint what you feel. And so in a way, you can kind of see that Franz Marc is really trying to find the soul or color of this animal and what it's really feeling, or how he's feeling. I said that it really seems like the deal is particularly happy or content, and it's not really disturbed by anything at this point, so it kind of just looks natural. Again, with the plein air, it is kind of outside of the plein air because he is painting different colors and aspects. Even though the painting does look pretty real, you can see some little bit crazy colors, but it still goes with the plein air aspect a little bit. So soon after he got out of his Van Gogh stage, he started becoming very popular among lots of his fellow artists and people who were just really into art itself. And that's when he started to do an almanac with other few artists, where he was made editor. And in this book, there was lots of essays on painting, and there was lots of photographs of Russian and Bulgarian folk art, and African and oceanic mask and child art. So in this almanac, if you were in it, you were considered like a really great artist. So I thought for Franz Marc to be an editor of the whole almanac, plus have his own art included in the almanac, he must have been a pretty good artist. As more time passed along after he was in the almanac and things like that, he started to paint more and more animals, and he liked finding their emotion, and he wanted to capture their spirit and the nature of this animal life. So as he was drawing these animals, he became very fascinated with animals themselves and their anatomy, and he wanted to show that through his paintings. And he explained to a man that when painting animals, we should put ourselves into the soul of these animals in order to guess with the images they see. And so I guess what he's really trying to say here is that you pretty much need to put yourself in this animal to be able to feel what this animal's feeling, so you can be able to draw their emotion inside your painting. And so as you look through like these paintings, you see the more and more these paintings of these animals are really either happy, sad, or content. So they all have different facial expressions or the way they're feeling. And so in this first painting in the Tower of Blue Horses, you see this life-size tall painting of these blue horses with different facial expressions. And the background with like fiery colors, and then I saw, when I looked at this painting, I thought about like how Mark said about feeling their emotion and seeing it through that particular animal's eyes. And I was really wondering if at the time when he portrayed this emotion and when he was portraying the animal's emotion, was he really like portraying his emotion also with the animal's emotion? Because I looked at it and it's kind of like, these horses look really upset, but then I also feel like, why would these horses be upset unless he had something to do with it also? So, we look through some more paintings that kind of have the same idea as the blue horses, and if you look at Yellow Cow, you see this cow who's, well, yellow, obviously, and it looks like it's bucking in a forest, and obviously it's yellow, and yellow is not really like a happy color, especially in this painting. You see a lot of like reds and yellows and oranges again, and then, of course you see some greens, but I feel like this cow is really unhappy because it's like bucking and it just doesn't look very happy. So I guess like Franz Marc thought a lot of animals were unhappy when he was painting all of these, and so I don't know, I just thought it was kind of cool to see how he really thought about all of these animals. And in fighting forms, this one is really weird to me because, well, I wouldn't say like exactly weird, it's just, I don't know, I feel like it's different because you have a bull, which you can't really see, it's like this black circle, then you can kind of see the face if you stare at it for a little bit. You see a bull, and it looks like it's kind of bucking towards, somebody, I don't know. And then I see like an eagle, a red eagle, and these colors, I just keep looking at them, and they're not, like, the colors look happy, but the emotion that he's portraying in it is just not happy at all. So again, I feel like he's really feeling that these animals are really depressed, unless he was kind of depressed himself, because there was war going on at times it was war going on while he was painting these, and so since he was painting animals, he was looking at the animals, and maybe the animals were unhappy because, there's war going on and they're not all treated the same. And so, yeah, things like that. And then the last one, Tyrol, or The Fate of the Animals, this one really kind of freaked me out because I see, like, these two horses, and they just look super angry, and they're green, and they look bitter, and it looks like there's something, like, blood kind of shooting down from this, I don't even know, like, some kind of wooden branch or something, and then, I don't know, it's just like all of these animals look like they're getting ready to get killed or are getting killed, and I really feel like this one really shows parts of the war, because, animals weren't really sacred during the times of the war because you needed food, and, if they're in the way, they're in the way. So I feel like Franz Marc was trying to say, like, these animals are not going to live because, the war is going on, and that'd be really bad, and that's how he was feeling. So, but then, like, there's this other painting that I liked, and it was totally weird because, you see, it's called Cat on a Yellow Cushion, and it looks all warm and fuzzy, and it just makes you feel good inside. So I was wondering if Franz Marc was kind of like in a good place, or he just had a cat and was like, oh, I just want to paint this cat because it looks really, fuzzy and cuddly. So I really think that Franz Marc took his view on animals really seriously. And I actually like that about his paintings. I feel like that's a really cool aspect, to be able to see animals' spirits and how they're feeling. So Franz Marc, he stopped painting, well, legally, I should say, when his art got degenerated. And so he actually had to go to war and fight for his country, which he was proud of. And so he actually died in battle along with his other fellow artists, but his art still lived on. But other than that, I feel like Franz Marc was a really great artist who contributed a lot to Expressionism. Expressionism was a very powerful movement in my opinion. The art really brought out the expression that these artists were trying to show, and I believe that that's an amazing thing to be able to do. So Expressionism is a movement that should never be forgotten. I think that these artists, Franz Marc, Edvard Munch, and Emil Nold, were really important in this movement because they all showed the meaning of art and, expression within themselves, and they had different types of ways of expressing themselves. Like Edvard Munch, he really expressed himself by making self-portraits and doing different things like that that showed, why he was upset, happy, or sad. And then you had Franz Marc, who was doing things like painting animals, and he liked the anatomy of them, and so he really showed his expression through animals. And then last but not least, Emil Nold, he showed his expression through different paintings, like paintings of Africa and things like that, but he really expressed it really through different peoples and didn't really have his own expression in there. But, I really feel like these were really important artists, and I hope that you learned something from this lecture.